Welcome to episode 8 of the Liz McMullen Show. My guest this evening is Decky Bradshaw. Welcome.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. So you have such a rich dialogue in all your books and a lot of good sense of humor going on. And one of the namesake for your pen name, Decky, has the most incredible mind. She's very cinematic. She's very musical in her head, and it's actually the first character that I've encountered where I'm like, I do that all the time.
I have that running jukebox, and I've often wondered if other people had it going too, that constant soundtrack to your life playing in the background. So I kind of gave that, they say write what you know, so Decky has those characteristics as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I love it because lately, for reasons that I have no way of explaining, I get little visual video clips, little sparks of images, things that, I write as a hobby, and like little things that'll spark, like I'll get, maybe a 5 or 10-second feed, and I'll have vision, sensation, and concept, and then I try and remember it so that I can put it somewhere. But yeah, I do that. I have musical things that go on in my head, and I have when a certain song on iTunes comes on and my brain just starts going in a direction. So I really like Decky, the character.
I'm glad you do.
So one of the things that you had mentioned in emails is that Molly Kincaid shows up in all of your books. Where did Molly come from?
Oh, I was writing Out on the Sound. It was the first novel I ever wrote, and I needed a lawyer. And I did exactly what you were just talking about. This little snippet of a movie played in my mind, and I saw Jodie Foster come walking through the courthouse doors into the courtroom. And it just struck me as funny. Wouldn't it be funny if this was not Jodie Foster, but she looked like Jodie Foster? And that comes from when I was young, not so much now, but when I was young, I looked like Jodie Foster. My parents we were sitting in a restaurant, and these people came up and said, can we get Jodie to sign an autograph? I was 9. So throughout my earlier years, I would get mistaken for her just for a moment, but it was always kind of funny. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, this is my little inside joke. And it started out, I never intended for Molly to be anything but a lawyer in that book. Mm-hmm. But she just kept coming back.
Oddly enough, I'm sorry to interrupt, but listening to the cadence of your voice, I can almost hear a little bit of Jodie in it, actually.
Well, that I will take as a compliment.
I have a very acute audio sensory kind of thing, and I was like, I'm hearing this similarity, the cadence, the way that you speak, the tone, and the way the words are shaped. Obviously, not a dead ringer, but I could totally see it, not just visually, but auditorily.
So that's how Molly started out as my little inside joke. My wife and I would laugh about it, and I have gotten reviews where people are like, that is so old to have the characters look like an actor and blah, 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 but you visualize something in your head, and it's easier to just go ahead and say, look, this is what she looks like. This is who she is. And it became part of the thing that she has to deal with all the time. And Molly House on Fire, you see the scene where she walks in, the girl thinks she's Jodie Foster. Everywhere she goes, somebody's whispering, oh, my God, Jodie. I didn't know Jodie was a lawyer. Uh-huh. Those kind of things. Those are funny. To me, and if I'm not entertained by my own writing, I can't imagine why anybody else would be. So,
no, I can totally see that. When was the book Molly House on Fire born? Like, what made you take that delve into seeing or to revealing to your fans a little bit more about this character and where she came from?
After the first 4 books, and it was obvious Molly was going to hang around, I started thinking about writing a book about Molly, but I had no idea really who Molly was other than the things I had already written about her. I didn't know anything about Molly before she became a lawyer. Mm-hmm. But the fans of Molly insisted that when is Molly's story? When is Molly's story? When is Molly's story?
Mm-hmm.
And I was wandering around in the living room one day going, I don't really know who she is. I haven't done a backstory on this character. And it flashed. It came to me in a flash. I sat down, I wrote the prologue,
mm-hmm.
and she, it's that writer thing. The character told me who she was.
Mm-hmm.
And once the prologue was written, the rest of it just came. It just flooded out. So I really didn't have to think about her story. She told it to me.
Well, that's good. And the other thing that I found interesting, because I read Molly House on Fire first, was how in Out on the Sound, it would seem that Decky and Charlie were one of the rainmakers that made her as wealthy as she had become.
One of them, yes. She was lucky in Molly House on Fire. You find out that she was lucky to work for a lawyer who set her up
mm-hmm.
to win a big case to get her started. But Out on the Sound provided Molly with quite a chunk of change.
Yeah, I like, one of the things that I enjoy about authors who have several books with a character that floats in and out is you get to be, attached to them, and you want to know about their lives and what makes them who they are. And what I liked about Molly is if I had not read that first, I would have never have thought that she came from such a violent home, and that, she seemed so glamorous and wealthy and poised and intelligent and in control that you never would have put her as growing up in a little shack with her mother who had a drug and alcohol problem and a father who beat up on her mother on a regular basis and, pretty much fed all of her, addictions.
Right. I think what I was trying to say in that book, and I think what Molly was trying to say, is that you never know what road somebody has walked. All you see is what they let you see.
Mm-hmm.
And she never let anybody see the other part of her life.
Yeah, she had things on lockdown, but I understand that completely. Somebody who's been through such trauma, and on top of that, she's so in control of herself that she hates when people pity her. And there's a comic scene in Molly House on Fire where she screeches to a halt. Can you tell us a bit about that scene?
Oh boy, which one?
Where she's in the car with Leslie, and Leslie's making comments about her upbringing, and she pulls off the highway.
Oh yeah, I needed Leslie to understand where the line was with Molly. And I didn't want to tell it,
mm-hmm.
so I just let Molly react. And in that reaction, you saw that Molly isn't always in control, that she lost control because she was being pitied.
Mm-hmm.
So she flies off the road, slams the car in park, gets out, and storms into the store because she's just not going to deal with that. So every little window into Molly's personality and how she felt about things, I had to make sure her actions went along with that, yeah.
Absolutely. And when it comes to controlled characters, in the same way as I've known people who are in great amount of control of their life, that they're so accustomed to keeping this force field around them, where they have the armor and they're impervious, but the second something breaches it, then, all kinds of alarms clang and control goes rapidly out the window, which, speeding off of the highway and making a rooster of gravel as she screeches her really hot rod luxury car to a stop.
Oh, I want that car so bad. That is just an awesome car. I even looked to see if there was one I could just go look at here in town, but there wasn't one. But I sit and watch the video of that car sometimes just because I can imagine how much fun that would be to drive something that fast. I'm from North Carolina. I love NASCAR.
Uh-huh.
So racing is in my blood. My dad used to race. So.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of fun.
Well, that actually showed up in Molly House on Fire. One of the things that I found fascinating about the woman who became her love interest, Leslie, is that she too knows how to speed and be like greased lightning.
Yeah, Molly noticed her car really before she noticed her.
Yes, she just nice car.
Yeah, a nice car like that. And look, somebody loves it, takes care of it. That's her kind of person. And then it belongs to Leslie's. Oh, wow.
I know, and she's trying her best not to be attracted to Leslie. And Leslie gives her a run for her money. So I like the different moments that you built in there where one or the other has been called out on their game. And they're like...
Yeah. I had to find somebody that could match Molly in not only intelligence, but character. Mm-hmm. And that strength. She would not... I never thought Molly would ever fall for anybody that wasn't an equal. Mm-hmm. So.
Absolutely. And it's a very sensitive point because Leslie's profession is... would you consider her a psychologist or...
Yes, she's a psychologist.
So for somebody who doesn't want to be probed, falling in love with somebody who they're by their occupation, and usually people choose occupations according to what's more similar to them temperament-wise. So that has to be a huge challenge for Molly.
I thought that having Leslie be a psychologist was really perfect. It was going to take somebody who could break through those walls that Molly had built. And what better person to do it than someone who could really look and see that the walls were there for a deeper meaning. There was something behind all those walls that she needed to find out what it was.
And Leslie had a few walls of her own, that she probably didn't realize. And also an ill-fated tryst with the librarian.
I love the librarian. She makes me laugh. She's not going to give up. That was what I liked about the librarian. She wanted Leslie, and she was once she was rebuffed, it became her mission in life to find out what it was that made Leslie tick.
Of course, it just makes me think of Glenn Close. I will not be ignored.
Exactly. And then Molly comes into town, and the first thing she's heard all these rumors about this hot lawyer in town, and then she walks into her library and she starts hitting on her, and then she finds out that Leslie's involved with her, and she's, this is not good.
Leslie's bad. You want to come in bed? Oh, we don't need a bed. Let's run naked through the stacks.
Through the stacks, yeah. Running naked through the stacks, yeah.
Those things thrown out. I'm just kidding, but if you want to, I'm not.
Exactly.
Okay. How did you get the structure of the Branch family together? I think I see that in Molly House on Fire, there was an intricate, decades long. This family had money, this family bullied everybody and, swindled them and did lots of awful things. And everybody just had to back up because they were in charge.
That's really stereotypical of Southern writing. There's always the bad family. But, I look at stereotypes. There's always some truth to them. And growing up in rural North Carolina, there were always those families that had taken advantage of, for example, taken advantage of people after the Civil War. They still had some money, and they took advantage of everybody that didn't. Or just bad men, just one bad man after another coming out of one family. Bad women too. They're just bad people. So it wasn't that much of a stretch for me to imagine that there was a family that in this county that Molly had to deal with and that people have been dealing with for years.
Hopefully this is not too much of a spoiler, but it was interesting to see that there was a precipitating event that led Sarah, who's Molly's mother, down the road of, alcoholism and addiction, and that was that she was the victim of a violent crime.
Right. Addiction has played a part in my life, in my family history, and underlying having experience with dealing with addictive personalities, there's always an underlying either tragedy, a physical tragedy, or a mental tragedy that has occurred in their lives, and they're running from that. So it wasn't a stretch to think that something could have happened to this young, promising woman who suddenly became a drug addict and an alcoholic.
Yeah, what I think worked well in the way that you created the narrative and the background is, at first you're just introduced to Molly as a child who has a mom who has addiction and also is regularly beaten by her father. But you just like you say, you don't know what shoes some folks have walked in. Molly had no idea, had no concept of her mother as a healthy, happy person or having promise, and then learning later that she did have a lot of promise until she, was charmed by Evan Branch.
Right. You see that a lot. You look back at your high school class, at those people that had promise, and see some of them now and wonder what in the world happened. And Molly never cared to ask. She had no concept that her mother was anybody other than the woman that she had experienced. And I think that really helped Molly in the end, knowing that her mother was somebody who had promise at one time.
And after after a period of time, after Evan was murdered, in self-defense, but eventually she got the right doctors, and they helped her bring to the surface,
deal with it.
Deal with it. Somebody actually treating her rather than just having her in a mental health holding pattern. And then she came out of it, and she was clean, and she was sober, and, had promise, and was looking forward to her daughter's 18th birthday because she had given Molly up for adoption. But once she turned 18, she was going to be able to meet her, and was looking forward to that. And then her life got snuffed out, and because Molly didn't know what happened between the time when she left home and where her mother was just before her birthday, only interpreted the news that her mother had been found drunk and dangling, and done something, finally luck had run out, and that her addictions had led to the end of her life. Right.
And it was what she expected.
Absolutely.
She expected that. It didn't surprise her, and therefore she never even bothered to find out what happened. She was young, but she was old enough to have tried to find out what was happening. And Joe, he told her, it's just one bad thing after another happened, and it finally caught up with her, and so she took it at face value. So it was a journey that she needed to take. She needed to go back and find out.
Yeah, I can see that. In my family as well, I've had some family members who struggled with both alcoholism and drug addiction. And for one of them, they had fallen in love in high school, and the person that they loved broke their heart. And the misfortune that she had was that she was young during the late 60s, early 70s when, drugs really exploded on the scene, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so she didn't have a chance. She fell into a crowd that was interested in experimenting with that. And it's long before any of us knew, about addiction and whatnot. Not even up until the 80s, did people really examine what was going behind that. And once you get tripped into the alcohol and the drug use, then that was it. And she passed away very young. She was in her mid-40s. But she looked like she was in her 60s. And it was all because, something seemingly so small that, has happened to, of course, thousands of people. But for her, it just turned her life just slightly. And when I was growing up, I was always told that, like, she was the brightest. She was the one who had the most promise. And, many people compared me to her, how she was before everything changed. So it's a very bizarre way to grow up. It's like, this is what you should not do, and I, in ways, I'm grateful for it because I never got involved in drugs, and I never really spent a lot of time drinking. You know what I mean? Other than
that's the thing with Molly is that I think it finally dawns on her that those things that her mother did prevented Molly from doing them.
Yes.
She was exposed to so much and saw so much that she was determined at a young age, you can either fall into addiction or you can run from it. And she ran.
And, and the thing is, growing up, going to college, there are a lot of people like, oh, do you want to try this? Do you want to try that? And, I was like, no, that's okay. There's more than one thing at work. One, I didn't want to ruin my life by experimenting and playing with fire. The other thing is I didn't want to lose control. And the way I explained to some folks, it's like you're drinking alcohol, maybe it comes out of your system or you get sick. But you take a drug, you're trapped until it runs through your system. And I was like, I don't want to be on that train. I don't want to take that.
Exactly.
It's like I need exits, ripcords, everything that you could think of.
I did the same thing with my son that I did with myself. It was, you are genetically predisposed to alcoholism. Therefore, don't drink more than 2 days in a row. And that was always my mantra growing up all the way through college. We'd have those wild, crazy weekends, but in the end, I would sober up pretty quick, and, I was never going to be an alcoholic. I was determined, and I was determined that my son was not going to be an alcoholic as well. So we spent a lot of time talking about addictions and personalities and being genetically predisposed to those things.
Turning back to some of the characters in Molly House on Fire, I think, I interviewed Clifford Henderson not too long ago about a book that literally had one of those cliches where you're driving your car and it goes kerplat in the middle of a very small town, America, and you expect like Deliverance soundtrack to go along with it. And there's, what I find really cool is that you go to this town and you see Molly, the citified girl who, is coming back to this awful place that she thought that she escaped. And then person by person, you meet these wonderful people, anywhere from the drugstore or, you're going, the cop that comes up on you when you're having a discussion with, dangerous man like Jarvis Branch, and he comes up and pretty much tells the good old boy where he can shove it.
Right.
And then he has to take off. I like that a lot. I thought that was cool.
Well, southern small towns get a bad rap. We're a bunch of redneck hicks. But in the middle of those redneck hicks, you're going to find those jewels who are just good people. So there's always that. You've got to have that good and evil. If you don't have some good, you can't measure evil.
It's
so
true.
You have to have those characters in there. Like
I loved Brad Dawson's a cop and his wife Tammy, and the two of them have a bed and breakfast. And I want some of Tammy's cooking, by the way.
Yeah.
I want to sit down at her table.
You'll notice there's always food in my books.
Lots of really good, rich food.
Lots of food. My characters are always struggling to stay healthy and eat healthy, but, they put that gravy down in front of you and boom, you're in it. So.
And those biscuits and...
Oh, yeah.
But Tammy was accommodating once they hunkered down in the bed and breakfast. She started to choose a little lighter fare, but it just made me think back. My grandmother's from Oklahoma, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she met my papa at a USO in World War II, and he brought her up north to Hoboken, New Jersey. And so my childhood, my grandma passed when I was 8, but my childhood I spent, all of the meals were cooked by her in the house, in the basement, in the kitchen. And she used to have a little transistor radio up on, a little tile, and we'd be listening to country music. And
Those are the best kind of memories, aren't they?
I have this thing from school. I was very young, and I think we were writing a little play, and I was Loretta Lynn. It's I wanted to be Crystal Gale. I wanted her beautiful long hair, and I wanted Dolly and Kenny Rogers to be my parents.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Dolly Parton as your mom. That would be great.
Absolutely. And now that I know how her head is, she's so wonderful that I was like, she would have been a great mom.
Yeah, she is a very smart lady, very smart. Super businesswoman.
Mm-hmm. And she's still a good egg, another person coming from humble roots and never forgetting it and never getting too big for her britches, No,
we went on vacation with my parents. We met them in Gatlinburg for Christmas. And one of the things that was most interesting about being in Gatlinburg was hearing people, or not Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, was hearing people talk about what she did for them, and how every child that started school there got a bundle of books, and they had a program where she was provided books for them throughout their high school, throughout their school years.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was amazing. She's very interested in literacy and making sure that those people come out of those mountains with some education.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an excellent character trait. I think she's wonderful. And her books are fabulous. If you ever get a chance, you should listen to her audiobook where she reads her own biography.
Oh.
I had to pull off I was listening to it driving back from North Carolina one time to Oklahoma, and I had to pull off at a rest stop and just sit and laugh because I was laughing so hard I could not drive.
Now that's a review if I ever heard one. Now I have to go up and get that.
You have to get the audio one where she's reading the book. It is perfect.
Ultimately, she's a storyteller, as a musician and
yes,
just as a human being. Yeah, I like that. That's why I like the soundtracks that happen in Decky's mind and all these books, is because things queue up for me that way. I get these little songs and whatnot in my head.
Music is really important to me when I'm writing. Every book I write has a soundtrack that I make on my little iTunes thing. I put a little folder there, put the title of the book, and every time I come to a part of the book where a certain song plays in my head, I go and find it, put it in that soundtrack, and if I'm ever having a problem writing, I just turn the soundtrack on and listen to it for a little bit. It puts me right back where I need to be. Music is one of those things that has always been in my life. My dad's a singer. My grandparents were both musicians. It's just sort of always been there, and I find that it helps me stay focused on the emotions that I'm working with.
So do you share these playlists on your website?
I haven't. I have shared them with some of my readers groups on Facebook, but I did include it in Out on the Panhandle. I did include the song list because it was really important that people hear what Decky was hearing.
I can see that, because the moment you mentioned that, I said, that's because you imagine, people having the playlist and having it in the background as they read your novel. It would be a very interesting convergence, I'm sure.
There were a couple of songs in the Molly House on Fire playlist. Kelly Clarkson.
Oh,
Because
absolutely.
of You. That book.
I was like, no, you didn't. Song. When Leslie, made that comment about not straying from the sidewalk, I was like, you didn't just pull that on Molly.
I did. I did. And I think that's that song pretty much whenever that and Alison Krauss and Brad Paisley and Because of You with Kelly Clarkson and I Wonder by Kelly Pickler, all of those songs, I would put those on. And Independence Day by Martina McBride. Those songs really resonated in that book. All of those emotions that those songs bring up. Anytime I came to a point in that book where I felt like I wasn't in it, put those songs on and boom, right back there.
Oh, that's
right
great.
In the middle of it. That was a difficult book to write. It was an emotional book.
Absolutely emotional. Painful. And other little things, pop up in there. Like Rainey shows up, and I haven't read any of the Rainey books. But Rainey shows up, and she has this very controlled, precise way about her. And very, very no nonsense. And obviously her wife is, a counterpoint. But what I thought was awesome was when, Molly's just talking about, this blog and whatnot that she heard about, and that, and then Robbie goes on about all the things that are in there and whatnot. And she's like, what?
Agent Sexy.
Agent Sexy. She's like, what? Hold on, I'm going to make a phone call.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, you have my kids on that website. You've been to my pediatrician. That needs to be taken care of.
Rainey is extremely paranoid, and for good reason. She has serial killers coming out of the woodwork after her and her family all the time. I said to my wife that Rainey is going to turn out like Murder, She Wrote, where I'm going to have to move her from the town because all the people will be dead. I'll have to, Jessica had to go to New York because there was nobody left alive in Cabot Cove to kill. So.
That's what I wonder. There's this another series that I was pondering because I'm interviewing Radcliffe later this month, and I was thinking about the Justice series, and after a certain point, I'm like, can you stop shooting Rebecca Fry, please? I'm like, her poor wife. Her poor wife. How many times did she have to see her wife in intensive care after being shot? I'm like, can you stop it? But I understand there has to be tension, and you deal with the characters running in the series. And I love the series. Don't get me wrong. But there was at one point where a character in Michael was a female executive, character, and she in a previous novel had been hit by a car because the person who should have been driving the car, Sloane, was not. So when she got out of the car, she got hit instead of Sloane getting hit, and that's who the target was. And so she had a concussion, and they didn't know if she was going to die. And then in another book, this mafia characters getting interested in her and whatnot. I was like, no, I can't bear to see it. It's like, stop hurting my friends, characters.
Right,
my friends.
Right. That's the thing with writing these Rainey novels is trying to be creative enough so that they don't become redundant, and that I don't have, I don't kill off all the characters, but when I did the research for Rainey, and I've been researching the Rainey character since I started really reading at a very young age, detective novels. My mother is addicted to the true crime novels. Anne Rule was everywhere, all over our house. So I've been reading about profilers and serial killers my whole life. I'm just fascinated by it. So I've done a lot of research, and these guys do, for the rest of their lives, have to look over their shoulders because these serial killers become enamored with the people who hunt them.
Absolutely, that's a part of the game. It's like, what's the fun if there's no audience, and then their favorite thing is to taunt the cops, you know?
Right. So there's some realism there. It really does happen. There's a reason most of those retired profilers live in gated communities behind armed security guards. They have to.
Yeah, I don't think she's being. You mentioned that other people may perceive her that she's being paranoid, but for good reason. For me, I'm like, she's just being really prepared.
Really prepared. She says that there's a distinct difference between being paranoid and prepared, and a higher survival rate for one of them.
Yes, absolutely. And for me, I was thinking when not just Agent Sexy, but when they had pictures of her wife and her children, I was like, that crossed the line. Right,
it does. And then I have a lawyer, a judge that I work with on all of my, anything that has to do with law. Because one of the things I said about Molly was, why in the world did I decide to write about a lawyer? I know nothing about lawyers. And then my wife pointed out I knew nothing about profiling either. So I was like, okay, I got you. Research. And I use, I send everything to this judge, and she looks over it, makes sure it's right. And we were talking about the stalking issue and what you can and can't do to people. I had to look up the law. And if you are in a public place and your picture is taken and you're a celebrity or someone of interest, you lose your right to privacy. That's why you see them ducking and that's why, going back to Jodie Foster, you don't see pictures of her kids. When you do, she's covering their faces. She's huddled over them. She has a very good reason to be paranoid.
Absolutely makes complete and total sense. But from a sense of little lesbian justice, I kind of thought it was fun that I'm going to take care of this here. What? Hold on, what is it called? All right.
That particular website comes up in this third book, even after she tries to shut it down. She's still in a running battle because she has no idea who it is. And that scares her.
Yes. That was actually, because when I got to that towards the end, I'm like, this is gonna show up again in another book. That was my feeling. I'm like, dun dun dun. I mean, it's one of those things that you can't tie up. Like you try to tie up loose ends as you get toward, for subplots and whatnot. But it's those dangling ends, like, oh, something special can happen here.
Yeah. So the stalker comes back. It's a website. Cookie Cutter comes back. People who have read them are going to go, oh, good. I named a character Cookie Cutter and spend the entire time, every time she's anywhere near the scene, somebody comments on her being named after a kitchen utensil. So I have to put those jokes in there, especially in serious books like Rainy. And I thought Molly House on Fire was, as I said, it was very an emotional book, but I had to put the funny parts in too, because it never fails when I'm involved in a serious situation that somebody doesn't say something funny just to break the ice.
Absolutely.
And you have to give the reader a chance to breathe.
Because reading your stuff, even the ones that have, well, not even the ones that have legal elements in it, but it's not a nail-biting story. You're not writing, the suspense thriller. Though you do have, the crimes that were involved in Molly, and then towards the end of Out on the Sound, what happened, and, who done it or what's going behind it. Because I see them more as, character-driven rather than that ethos. So, since you're not having to be serious all the time or, having that driving sense of motion, you have more room for, lots of sense of humor. It's not just little pockets here and there. There's a lot of laughter.
Yeah, with the Rady Bell series, that is a thriller. series, and I try to get that heart beating really fast, breathless reading. I want that. I seek that out. But I always give the reader a chance to catch the breath. Mm-hmm. There has to be that moment where they go, okay, because you can't have that. I always call it that Halloween movie, or was it Friday the 13th? That noise. So you have that going on. You have to give them a break every now and then and let something else play for a minute.
Well, I could totally see that because I haven't read the Rainey books. I've only read the Out on the Sound and Out on the Panhandle and Molly House on Fire, and I like them because to me they read as romances, even though there's some peril. And to step over to Out on the Sound for a bit. Often when I do interviews, I talk about fade to black or, whether romance or, sexual activity happens in the book and where it happens and whatnot. And I remember thinking to myself that, when I was reading Out on the Sound, I'm like, they fell in love that fast and they've already had sex? I mean, where is the tension going to come from? And that was my big question as I was reading through. And then, the tension, it did come.
Hurricane Lizzie.
Ooh! Do you know, it's just funny because my nickname is Lizzie.
Yeah. I've had answered this question before about Decky and Charlie falling in love that fast. And, one of the things I say about writing is that say it's fiction and tell the truth. They'll never believe it. Mm-hmm. And they'll think that it's, no way possible. And the funny part is that usually the most true parts of my books are the things that people question. I met my wife one day and spent the next 3 or 4 days driving by her house, waiting to see if I could run into her. And I was straight. Had never had a sexual relationship with a woman at all. My best friend was gay, so I had been around lesbians, but I was friends with lesbians, but I dated guys, been married, and she caught my eye, and I put the move on her within hours of seeing her for the first time. So it can happen.
Oh, no, and the thing is,
it can happen. So when I started writing that book, it wasn't necessarily the tension of the budding romance. We didn't have a budding romance. We had a fall in love and I love you the next morning, and we've been together for 25 years. Woo. So I felt like that was absolutely possible. And then we got to know each other. It was weird. It was one of those things where I felt like I had known her my entire life from the very first time I talked to her. In Out on the Sound, the sequel to Out on the Panhandle, you understand why Decky felt that way immediately.
Yeah,
there was a recognition.
The thing that I really, in real life, in my relationships, usually very short notice, I've had many one-night stands turn into relationships, and I've been with my partner for almost 8 years, and we started dating on a Friday, and then not too long later, we were living together and stuff. So I find it ironic and somewhat mentally hypocritical of me to think of things implausibly. But I guess in terms when you're reading a novel, it's necessary to maintain a level of tension. And right. Once the tension is gone, I was like, well, all right, what was the point of that?
Well, the tension in this book had to come from the fact that it was, what I was telling was what it was like to come out in a family like Decky's, mm-hmm. where mom was going to lose her cookies. And dad was going to be, well, I don't agree with what you're doing, but I love you. Uh-huh. And I actually had somebody write me and tell me that they thought that Lizzie was just a little over the top. And that whole gun incident was just unbelievable. And I read it to my wife, and we just burst out laughing because that was absolutely true. So, yes.
So truth is stranger than fiction. We have planned to do a reading on the show. Are you ready to give us a little bit of Out on the Panhandle?
Sure. I'm not going to start at the beginning what I decided to do was introduce this book. Decky and Charlie are going to Charlie's house in Oklahoma on the Panhandle for the first time after they've been together for 2 years. Now, Decky's met some of Charlie's family, but not all of them. And Charlie is one of 10 siblings. So she's this gigantic family, and they breed like rabbits. So they're going to the family reunion out in Beaver, Oklahoma. I did not make that name up. That place exists. It's Beaver County, and I couldn't imagine a better place to set a lesbian novel in Oklahoma other than Beaver, Oklahoma. I was looking at the map and went, oh, Beaver, this is it. This has got to be it right here. The Out on the Sound book, Out on the Panhandle books are kind of autobiographical in that I am from North Carolina. My wife is from Oklahoma. And some of the things happened and some of them didn't. But, you kind of mix the two together. I always say I dress up the truth in fiction. So we have dealt with, she was a lesbian when I met her, and had been for a long time. I was 26. She was 31. She has never had the conversation with her family about being gay. They don't talk about it. It's not that they don't know. They just don't talk about it. And I'm accepted there. I'm part of the family. It's not about that. It's about the conversation. And it's always been something that we've talked about. I can't believe you haven't had this conversation with your folks. So Out on the Panhandle is about Charlie and Decky going out to Charlie's house. And Charlie has never had this conversation with her family. So there's that conflict, and Decky doesn't know exactly what she's supposed to do, if she's supposed to pretend like to be her roommate or her friend or, what. And Charlie's like, don't worry about it. They won't ask. It's no big deal. So they're coming to the Panhandle. The other characters in the book, Murdy, Grace, and Thora, that is the historical fiction part of the book. It's two parallel stories. And you have Thora, who left the Panhandle at 9 years old and is coming back 20 years later at age 29 for the first time. So I wanted to share with you the two arrivals in Beaver, Oklahoma.
Okay.
So they're on their way, Charlie and Decky first, and they're on their way, they're almost to Beaver. And the front of the book contains a lot of historical information about the Panhandle that is necessary for you to understand the rest of the story. And I just kind of skipped over that part for this.
Okay.
For this part. Okay. So here's Decky. So you're well known in these parts, are you? Charlie chuckled again. Everybody's well known in a small town for one reason or another. There were only 34 of us in my graduating class. Kind of hard to fly under the radar, if you know what I mean. I'm sure everyone loved you, Decky said, turning her attention to the prairie beginning to open up around her. Along the tall ridges, she could see the giant white wind turbines constantly twirling in the Oklahoma wind. It really did come sweeping down the plain, and there was certainly plenty of waving wheat, just like the song said. Decky learned to spell Oklahoma listening to the musical when she was a child. Back then, she never dreamed she would wrangle her own cowgirl. She stared out at the wide open spaces with the original Broadway cast taking turns on her jukebox, singing O-K-L-A-H-O-N-A, while Charlie continued to chatter. Well, there is this one person who isn't my biggest fan, my brother Bobby's third and very new wife, Karen. She hates my guts. We were friends until junior high, and then she changed. She's my age, 12 years younger than Bobby. I guess he tried his generation around home and decided to dip into a different pool this time. Decky looked out over miles and miles of seemingly uninhabited wheat fields and pasture land. If there were fences, they appeared to be there to keep the cattle and horses off the road, not to restrict their movement over vast amounts of grazing land. A few houses popped up here and there, some inhabited, some long since abandoned. The iconic windmills Decky had seen in countless photographs from the Dust Bowl era dotted the landscape. In those pictures, the water pumps attached to the windmills had long since gone dry during a climatic catastrophe brought on by poor farming practice and a historic drought. the scene of one of the worst disasters to befall the nation and immortalized in John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, the Panhandle had since been reborn out of the Dust Bowl. Replacing those grainy black and white images of hopeless farmers fighting a losing battle against clouds of killing dust, Decky could see rolling pale green and golden hills interspersed with the vibrant fields of a few sunflower farms. The big yellow framed faces of the plants were turned, worshiping the blazing ball of fire slowly lowering over the western horizon. Occasionally, they would pass an irrigated field, the deep green of which stood out in contrast with the muted palette of the prairie grass and cut hayfields surrounding it. Huge round bales of hay dotted the landscape, where it had been harvested, rolled up, and left to await a time when it would be needed. Other than the ones around the creek beds, Decky saw only lone trees on the tops of few hillsides, with no other shade for miles around. The ground beneath those trees was crowded with lounging cows or horses attempting to escape the afternoon scald from the sun. Decky was listening to Charlie prattle on about her new sister-in-law while she took in the scenery. It appeared dislike was mutual between the two women. She asked, "Why do you think your brother has been married so many times?" Charlie must have thought about it quite a bit before now. She answered quickly, "He's a simple man, undemanding. He is satisfied with his life and always marries women who find that boring. That's what I think anyway." Decky turned her attention to Charlie. "You're not going to get bored, are you?" Charlie glanced at Decky and reached to squeeze her hand. "No, honey. Life with you has been anything but boring. I never know what you're planning next." Decky grinned, leaning over to kiss Charlie on the cheek. She whispered against Charlie's ear, Keeps you on your toes." Charlie threw her head back and laughed loudly. "Oh, God, yes. You definitely keep me on my toes. Your plans always go so well. How'd that last one work out for you?" Decky's last failed adventure involved finding a kitten companion for Charlie's ancient cat, Miss Kitty. It was a bad idea from the start. Decky had the scars to prove it. She answered Charlie, "I've sworn off plans involving crazed animals and bloodshed." Charlie slowed the car, making a 90-degree turn at the crossroads called Elmwood. They'd been driving due west on an absolutely straight road for the last 45 miles. Now they were headed due north. Decky was starting to see the pattern of the allotments from the land run days. The land was divided into 640-acre sections, equaling 1 square mile. The entire panhandle was gridded out with graded dirt roads running true in all 4 directions of the compass, creating a crossroads at every mile. The sandy paths looked like white stripes painted on the range, disappearing down the backsides of hills, only to return again on the next one and the next, straight as an arrow. Decky looked out Charlie's side of the car. It was more of the same. Lots of space out here. Doesn't look like nosy neighbors are ever a problem. Can't see them, let alone hear them. Charlie looked out over her homeland, the corner of her mouth curling into a smile. "We're pretty spread out, I'll admit, but it's a tight community. I bet you these people know their neighbors better than most of the folks living side by side in the city. Did you ever feel lonely or like you were missing out living way out here?" Charlie answered, "Who could be lonely with a family the size of mine? Plus, there was always work to be done on the ranch, school stuff to get done, and I played every competitive sport available. We all did. I had no time to feel like I was missing anything. I was too busy to get into too much trouble." Decky tilted her head to one side, trying to imagine Charlie as a young girl and the mischief she might have been involved in. She smiled at the prospects. "Too much trouble? Pray tell, what kind of trouble does a homecoming queen get into out here in the plains?" Without missing a beat, Charlie replied, "Oh, nothing too serious. I only needed bail money twice." Decky took the bait. "Seriously?" Charlie snickered. "No, I never needed bail money. A deputy took me home once for toilet paper in a teacher's house, but really, I was a good girl. Sorry to crush your dreams of applying my family for dirt on me. I'm squeaky clean." Decky had to laugh. "I think you're just saying that to keep me from snooping. There are bound to be some stories your brothers and sisters can't wait to share. It will just take the proper seeding to get them going." Charlie's tone lost some of its playfulness when she said, "Speaking of sharing, you have to promise me one thing. If you're going to ask me to leave any embarrassing stories out of my novels, I can't promise that," Decky said, trying to make Charlie laugh. "No, I've given up hope of our lives staying out of your books, off your Facebook page, or your Twitter feed." Decky only slightly defended sharing with her fans. "Only talk about the funny parts." "I know. so I'm making a request. When you see the naked baby picture of me on the mantle, please do not take a picture and share my ass with the world. Decky patted Charlie's thigh. Oh, don't worry, honey. I have no intention of sharing your ass with anyone. Good. Then welcome to my hometown. Charlie slowed the car through a series of speed zones, stepping down from 65 to 25 miles an hour. As they crested a hill, a very small town grew up out of the prairie. So small, Decky could see from end to end. Charlie added with a grin, "This is it, Beaver, Oklahoma, the cow chip throwing capital of the world." Decky burst out laughing. "You're kidding me, right?" "No, honest. We have the world champion cow chip throwing contest every April. People come from as far away as Japan and Australia to compete." "How could you withhold that little tidbit of information?" Decky asked, trying to control her laughter. Charlie pointed out the window. Decky turned to see a 10-foot-tall, fiberglass brown beaver on the back of a trailer, proudly holding a giant cow chip in its paws. The hand-painted sign on the front of the trailer said, "Beaver, Oklahoma, cow chip capital, welcomes you." As Decky stared out at the little town's pride and joy, she heard Charlie say, "Some things you just have to see to believe." And now that's true. There is a 10-foot-tall brown fiberglass beaver in Beaver, Oklahoma. I saw it myself, and I said, "This is going in the book. Going in the book."
Yeah, I was just listening to you, and I was thinking, like, I could picture myself as an 11-year-old girl, like, leaning my chin on my hands and looking up at you as you tell us the story. It was really great.
Cool. Okay, now I'm going to switch to Thora's story. Thora arrives, like I said, just before her 30th birthday. And this is her impression of arriving in the Panhandle. No man's land. No truer words were ever used to describe a place. I find myself in the most dire of circumstances, torn between duties born of lineage and longing to be back in my adopted home. Oh, Paris, the city of light, how I long for thee on these wretched dark nights. The loneliness of the prairie envelops me, and I dream of you. I was plucked from the very heart of civilization, where I was bearing witness to the birth of a new millennium, and summoned here to the end of the world. Tied here by blood I scarcely remember, and in all honesty tried desperately to forget. This may be the land of my origin, but I have seen the world now, and this desolate strip of sand and prairie grass, this no man's land, is the last place under heaven I would choose to be. Thora Etheridge, July 1st, 1905, Beaver City, Indian Territory.
Ooh, dun, dun, dun.
Oh, wait, there's more.
Oh, I know. Just go on ahead.
Okay. So Decky talks to Charlie after they read that little introduction, and then she goes back to reading again. This is a story that was handed to Charlie and Decky by Charlie's mother that is supposed to explain some genealogical anomalies that Decky has discovered. I began this story with a paragraph on the preceding page because I want to remember in the end where I was in the beginning. My actual entrance into the world took place on July 5th, 1875, 30 years ago today, here in this very room where I sit penning these words to paper. The candlelight by which I write dances shadows across the page, and I can scarcely locate the ink. It is well past midnight. The rocker where I keep my silent vigil sways there in the corner. So recently was it abandoned. I must have drifted into slumber only to be driven awake by a vision. So vivid was my dream. I sprang from my post and am seated here now, fulfilling the prophecy the images foretold. 4 days ago, when I returned to this place, I would have dismissed this dream as the product of my recent dietary vicissitudes. How naive, how utterly untouched was I by the very blood that sired me. My ears were deaf, my eyes blind. I maintained a happy existence with no thought to my heritage. I was content to play the part of the mysterious woman, flitting about Paris as some exotic creature of unknown origin. Shown the savagery of my people by well-meaning Christians, I shunned the spiritual world of my ancestors. I buried my native past with each passing decade, distancing myself from what I deemed to be a horribly ignorant society. I am ashamed now by my behavior. I have opened my ears. I have opened my eyes. I saw the visions clearly, and I know what I must do. That's it.
Of course, I come back to my Grandma Clara Lee Carter. And
Perfect name. I love that.
it fits, right? They're actually, Clara Lee, and my middle name is Everly.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, which is a family name as well. So Grandma Clara Lee. She also came from Oklahoma, and her mom was Cherokee and her dad was Irish, off the boat, Irish. So it was kind of fun reading the story, and then listening to you read it aloud, brings it more into cinematic visual mode for me. So it was fun.
I realized that a woman who had spent most of her adult life in schools, the best schools on the East Coast and then in Europe, probably wouldn't still have a Southern accent, but I don't think I can do a different one. I think I'm stuck.
Well, I could tell that you were suppressing it a bit, but there's only so much that can be done. Whereas for me, I grew up in Hoboken, and I went to college at Mount Holyoke in Massachusetts, and you can manage to pretty much suppress any kind of regional specific accent, kind of like a newscaster. But when I am in the company of somebody who has a Hoboken accent, which is, analogous to both, Brooklyn and New York, general, tri-state area thing, then I start to speak with an accent. It gets pretty fun. And apparently when I'm mad, I get really, really into that dialogue. And yeah, so you can tell. But the funniest moment I had, just straight in college, I'd only been there a little bit and was, recording my outgoing message. And I asked them to leave their name and number at the tone. I said, did I say number? Did I? It was like,
I was an actress, studying theater and then taught theater, and I was constantly getting critiques from the director that it's get, Vicki, not get. It's get. So I can speak without an accent if I'm playing a character on stage, but when I read like that, it's difficult to lose it.
Also, I was having a hard time picturing what she would sound like because she had been in France for so long. And before, even though there was information about, who she was growing up, I have a different thing in my head for Parisian. And one of my first girlfriend was Parisian, and she was at my college. She was a foreign fellow, which means she was there to help the language department, but also was allowed to take courses.
I had a friend who was from France in college also, and we took her to her first baseball game. And they drew tickets. They would draw out a seat number, and the person whose seat it was called down on the field to pitch the first ball to the catcher, and they called her number.
Oh, no.
And she was so new to America, like on the way up there, somebody said, crack your window, and she said, crack my window? Crack my window? Or like, roll it down a little bit. Oh, she didn't understand. She had never eaten a hot dog, so she got her first hot dog and a beer at Fall Park. So that was pretty funny. My favorite thing she always said was, "Oh, sheet."
Oh yeah, I have all these like really flamboyant memories about my first girlfriend, who was straight.
That presents a problem sometimes.
Yeah, and the way I describe it to people, I was like, yeah, she was straight, but she was French. And the reason why I put it that way is, she was gorgeous and had this just sumptuous way about her. Everybody just wanted to be near her and listen to her and see her and smell how good she smelled. Like
That's really odd because my friend from France dated both men and women while she was here. Mm-hmm. So it was, I guess it's very accepted. Americans are so uptight about, labels and who's sleeping with who anyway.
Well, for her, what I learned was that she loved to be adored. And it didn't matter who was adoring her.
Oh, that's very true. I hadn't thought about that. Yes.
Yeah, so because she was so, she was so engaging and beautiful and lovely and so smart. And so I could see that. I recognized that because, we didn't get into much of the shenanigans that I did, with my subsequent girlfriends. But before we started dating each other, we would cuddle and snuggle and kiss or whatever on cheeks or whatever. We'd sit down snuggled up to each other and watch movies as, some straight stuff. Girls do that stuff too. And then at one point it did cross the line and then we, took it to another place. But in the end of it, even though she was with me, I still considered her straight and just liked to be adored by me or anyone else. She liked the way I adored her, I suppose.
Yeah.
So yes, very, 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 very interesting stuff. So I'd love to continue, but we're running out of time for the episode. So I wanted to thank you for coming on the show and sharing your life and sharing your work and doing a wonderful reading.
Well, thank you, Liz. Thanks so much for having me. I'm impressed with your show. I've listened to all of them. I've got Anne's to listen to. She's a very, very nice person. I met her at the Lambda Literary Awards.
She's a very smart woman. Very smart woman. Very
smart and very, very kind and courteous. I enjoyed meeting her an awful lot.
Well, that's great. I'm glad you liked the show. Take care.
Okay, take care. Thank you.